think one of the biggest mistakes companies make about pricing is they don't understand or appreciate that pricing is a strategic decision. They think it's a tactical decision. And there are times when companies will say, oh, we have a pricing problem, and it's not. It's really a strategic positioning problem. In the manufacturing, value of a material is different depending on where it goes. If it's just going into construction materials that are in the road, for example, relatively low value, right? But if it's going into a building, or if it's going into a device or a product or an iPhone, that same material costs a lot more. Make a business case, not give them a business case. Work with the customer to develop a business case, a value case. If you work with a customer to build a business case collaboratively, it becomes the customer's business case. And when it's their case, they have confidence to take it to their executive team. And then you get the approvals and whatnot.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of the Price Talks. And with us today, we have Ed Arnold. Ed, you're a renowned pricing specialist. You have a few publications behind your name. Can you tell us a bit more about who you are?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Roy, for having me on this podcast. I'm really excited to be here. In terms of my background, I got started in the pricing space probably around 2008. When I had an opportunity to start a company called LeveragePoint, which was the very first customer value management platform. And it was based on the work of Tom Nagel, who created what's known as strategic pricing, and particularly his method called value modeling, or EVE analysis. So we built a company around an application that allowed users to create their own value models. That's how I got started. So I was a co-founder. I was head of product. I had many large clients, manufacturers primarily. And in the course of working with them, I became an expert in what's called value modeling, which is the basis of value-based pricing. So that is my background in terms of pricing. Since LeveragePoint, I was there for about 10 years. I've been working in one way or another in the value pricing space, and I'm currently a solopreneur, and I do a lot of coaching with teams and individuals on value strategy and value selling in particular. So that's my background. In terms of publications, I have a weekly newsletter on Substack called The Valorizer, which I will encourage people to sign up for. You can sign up for it for free. There's a lot of content on there already. I've written blogs for other companies, LeveragePoint, Ibica. I've also contributed a chapter to a book that Stefan Liauzou published back in 2014 called The ROI of Pricing. I contributed a chapter to that particular book. And I've written white papers and appeared on podcasts. And so you'll see my name in lots of places.
As you said, you came from a consulting perspective, and then I think you came in touch with Tom Nagel, and then you were thinking of, okay, this pricing is interesting. But how did that lead to being a co-founder of LeveragePoint? So what made you drive to become an entrepreneur at that point?
That's a good question. Well, we had an opportunity. Monitor Group at that time, which was the company I was working for, was going through a bit of a transition at that time. And originally they incubated a bunch of these software companies. We were one of a number that spun out of the Monitor Group. And we were able to launch with that. And I think that was probably one of the most exciting times of my career, was to create a new company and develop a product and serve it to the market. And this is so we were riding that particular wave, and
Yeah.
it was excited to get another chance to ride that particular wave. I'll just point out, I was recently at a conference. Of course, everyone was talking about AI as being that next wave,
Yeah.
which is already impacting pricing. So it's nice. It's nice to see these cycles come, because every time there's a major disruption or change in technology, it creates a lot of opportunity. So I would just say it was luck
Yeah.
that I was able to be in the right place in the right time to start LeveragePoint.
And your skills and area of expertise that brought you there, and then you were able to ride the wave, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's a combination of both. I think there's always luck in place, but also way of positioning yourself. So I think that's well done. Um, I think every pricing specialist, any professional in his life comes into a point that you're like, I should not have done that. I should have done that differently, right? So taking that into account, what from your side has been your biggest mistakes or your biggest challenge in that sense with regards to a pricing project?
Well, how long is this podcast? We can talk for days, I think. Um, well, of course, experience is the best teacher. But recently I worked with a client where I was doing my typical value pricing,
Yeah.
and, I don't know how I would describe this, but basically I was surprised when I shouldn't have been surprised, I guess is the way to put it. And just to tell you the story around that. So I was doing a project for a company that was licensing data, and I was especially confident about this because I had worked at Forrester Research as a product leader for a data product in customer experience data, CX data. So I said, "Oh, definitely. I mean, I know this business," and I said, "Hey, this is great. We
Yeah.
can do this." And what happened was, as I got into it, one of the things that I like to do in a pricing project is I assess the current pricing strategy, because sometimes you don't need to change the pricing strategy. You just position the product better on value.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so in order to establish a base, you need to establish a baseline to understand what the current discounting is. That seems pretty obvious before you can
Yeah.
make the recommendations for that. My mistake was I didn't realize that this company was very unsophisticated in terms of their approach to pricing, which really surprised me because, their data product portfolio was much larger than I dealt with at Forrester. And Forrester had a good basic pricing capability at that company.
Yeah.
This company had nothing. I mean, literally zero. And I had never encountered that before. I never even
Mhm.
thought it was possible. And so
Yeah.
this company had no pricing function at all. It was completely sales led.
That's always a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. It was sales led. And so because of that, there wasn't good data in tracking what they had in terms of discounts.
Yeah.
So sales was revenue driven, and didn't really care about price integrity at all. Every deal was a special deal, and they thought, hey, this is data, very high margins. We'll sell it for what we could sell it for. So very inconsistent ad hoc type of pricing, no controls, no review, no tracking at all.
Yeah.
And my mistake, to sum it up, was that this company was not ready for value. You have to have at least some sort of basics, capabilities or maturity before you can take on value. And what I should have done was basically took a timeout on that
Yeah.
project and say, hey, wait a minute, you guys aren't ready for this. We need to kind of go back and see what we can do to basically put some basic pricing structure on it, which they probably wouldn't have wanted to do anyway, because sales was separate, uh, separate group from who my client was.
Yeah.
So there was that misalignment there, big company misalignment, where one side wanted value, the other side wanted to do what they always did. And so, consequently, I stuck with the project. I did the best I can with the data that I could get.
Yeah.
But, overall, that wasn't my best success. There is a book. It talks about the pricing maturity model where you have these different stages,
Yeah.
and you have to be at least, a second. It's 5 stages in it. You have to be at least in stage 2 or 3 before you're ready for value. And this company was at stage 1.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think also for all the listeners, this is a great, right? Because in the end, most conversations you will hear is everybody's talking about value selling, and everybody wants to go towards value selling because that's the golden standard, I would almost say. But everybody also needs to understand there are some hygiene rules and basics you have to have in order before you can actually move towards it.
And I will add that it really has to come top down in terms of the strategic direction, because if you are allowing a sales team to do what they want with pricing,
Yeah.
then it's a non-starter as in terms of adopting value pricing.
Yeah, because actually I think, and to piggyback on that, because what you're saying here is so true, because that's basically one of the main questions I ask as well if I'm coming into an organization and we talk about differentiation and value add, and then you ask the question, okay, so what is your added value? And then we can looking into monetizing it. I see so many times that either senior leadership marketing has a very clear understanding, but sales doesn't have the same understanding. So there's either no alignment in that, or they can't quantify the value add. How have you seen that in your projects?
Actually, I think a lot of companies really don't know the value that customers get from their products across the
Yeah.
board. One of the things I did at Forrester was implement a voice of the customer program where you talked with customers, not just surveys, but qualitative interviews, and really find out how customers are using it and what they think value is. Often customers think about value differently than the product. And often the things that and I'm a product person, things that product people think customers should think about value
Hmm.
don't align with what people really think about value. And so you have to talk with them and you have to listen very, very carefully, not try to lead the witness about what it is, because value really comes down to what the customer gets from using the product.
Yeah.
So value comes from use. It's not from buying. And people try to sell features,
Yeah.
and features don't provide value. Using the product provides value, and that's how you quantify it. So you need to understand how customers use the product and what the results of that. That's why outcome-based pricing is becoming a thing now in AI,
Yeah.
because you're paying for results, or at least you think you're paying for results. It gets much closer to value.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm fully aligned with that, and it's good to hear.
Uh-huh.
And if we then look in a broader perspective, I think I already heard you saying as well from companies, they do not really understand values, the value add they do, maybe because they don't have enough conversations with their clients or the customers. Or so, from your personal experience, what are the most common mistakes you see companies make if it comes into pricing?
Well, backing up, I think one of the biggest mistakes companies make about pricing is they don't understand or appreciate that pricing is a strategic decision. They think it's a tactical decision. So pricing is really central to a product strategy. And there are times when companies will say, oh, we have a pricing problem. And it's not, it's really a strategic positioning problem. They haven't really defined what markets they're going after, or how they're competitively advantaged, what their competitive differentiation is. it's ill-defined. So I think that's where it starts. A lot of times when pricing consultants get hired, what they're really doing is they're treating a symptom of a deeper problem. They're in the wrong markets or they have the wrong products. So
Ah,
that's one big mistake.
yeah.
You can't fix a strategy flaw with pricing. You
No,
can't. Um,
no, this is very true. Yeah.
yeah, so that's the first one. The second one is assuming that you do have your product aligned and you're trying to get more value, what I call value capture. That is getting a higher price for what you're providing. Another mistake is they're not is with the pricing metric. Now, a pricing metric is how you pay for something. So, for example, in software, a lot of software is sold on a per seat basis. That's sort of the
Yeah.
SaaS model, which is not a great metric. And AI is going to be changing that quite a bit. But so that's what a pricing metric is. So the mistake that companies make is that their pricing metric is not aligned with the customer's value metric.
Yeah.
That is, what do they get from buying that? And the third metric that needs to be aligned with is usage. So you have to make sure that pricing, value, and usage are in alignment for your pricing strategy to be successful. And often I see is that there's a misalignment, particularly between price and value.
Yeah.
That happens.
Yeah. And what I hear you saying is I think it's very applicable to the SaaS industry, for example. Um, how do you also see parallels, for example, for manufacturers or wholesalers, if you're talking about the value selling possibilities there?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, in manufacturing, when I first got started with LeveragePoint, we dealt a lot with material manufacturers, specialty material manufacturers, and so they were looking at value in terms of the unit of measure that they sold the material. So whether it was by, kilogram or by pound or by ton or whatever, and they would talk about value per ton,
Yeah.
right? Well, the value of a material is different depending on where it goes. You know,
True.
uh,
Very true. Yeah.
I mean, if it's just going into construction materials that are, in the road in a road, for example, relatively low value, right? But if it's going into a building or if it's going into a device or a product or an iPhone, that same material uh, costs a lot more. So a lot of times when we were working with clients and we'd say, okay, well, what's that? What's our value? And I actually heard this would be like, oh, well, we charge an extra $1 per pound because of our reputation.
Yeah.
Like, well, what does that mean? Um, and
Yeah.
like totally missing the point about that the customer really doesn't care. I mean, this is the interesting thing about it, especially in that world, which is
Hmm.
why value pricing became, first was adopted in manufacturing, is because these large OEMs had procurement departments that were very good negotiators.
Yeah.
So they would focus in on that price metric of per pound. It got to be as low as possible. And they'd keep talking about that and not talk about the use case or the use value, right?
Yeah.
And so in order to do that, you had to flip it. You had to talk about the value per year that
Yeah.
provided to that company.
Yeah.
Well,
And
that was the big shift there.
it's also a lot in how you message it, right? So can
Hmm.
you bring across that value? And would you say, if you look at it in an average organization that doesn't do value pricing, value selling, on average, how long does it take for the full sales department to embrace that value selling? Because it's a different way of selling than what they're probably used to do.
Well, here's the interesting thing about that, Roy. Um, all you need to do is go into a company and find the most successful salesperson. And when you talk to them, although they might not call it value or they won't talk about it in the same way that I do or other pricing consultants do, they are selling value. I mean, I learned this. I mean, I had a client, one of my first clients back at LeveragePoint was Eastman Chemical Company in Kingsport, Tennessee. And this was a very profitable chemical company, had an interesting history. But I had met a salesperson there, and he told me how he sold these so-called commodity materials at premium prices. And when he laid out how he did it, it was value. It was textbook value. And so what I'll say is that all organizations have these people who are high performers, who figured out that that is the best way to sell to customers. The issue is with larger companies, how do you scale that? Right. So they'll scale it with a tool, or they'll scale it with a training program, or they'll scale it a lot of different ways. And as you say, you can spend a lot of money on that to do that. And I think there's a there's a big unmet need for what I call coaching, which is what I'm really leaning into now in my own practice, especially for mid and small size companies who can't afford that, which is, I want to democratize value selling. That's what I want to do. So when I say democratize value selling means that I could work with an individual or small team, and within their span of control, so they may not be able to change their pricing strategy, I can work with them and say, hey, look, here are your differentiators for this particular deal. Talk about this with the customer, provide some data, test that, make a business case, not give them a business case, work with the customer to develop a business case, a value case, because the real magic trick to this that I've learned is that if you work with a customer to build a business case collaboratively, it becomes the customer's business case.
Yeah.
And when it's their customer, when it's their case, they have confidence to take it to their executive team. Yeah. And then you get the approvals and whatnot. And so that's what I want to focus on, is I want more people to do that. And that's how you scale it. But I think you're right. On those large scale change management exercises really have a poor track record.
Yeah.
When you evaluate them. And I think what you have to do is, you have to work with people one-on-one, and it's something you really have to practice. I mean, it's a new skill that you have to learn. You have to be fluent in value conversations, and I write about value conversations on my newsletter. But that's the skill that salespeople need to master in order to be successful at value selling.
If I'm looking to your advice, what you would give to a B2B organization that's trying to take its first steps right into a mature pricing approach.
Right.
I already heard you said a great approach could be go to your champion salesperson, evaluate how that person closes its deals, and look at the value communication most likely that person is already doing, so you can distribute on top of that to start looking into value selling.
Yep.
I heard you saying before as well, whatever you do, make at least sure that the foundation is in order, right? That the basics is there. So if we just have to do a bit of a step-by-step approach, what would your advice be for an organization?
Yeah. So what I would do is, if you're going to start slow, right? Because that's another mistake companies make. They say, okay, we're going to do value for everybody starting tomorrow. So I like this agile approach of piloting things.
Yeah.
But the most practical way to do it is you first need to understand what value really is. All right. So you have to, and that doesn't take long. That's just basically reading what it is and forgetting what it isn't. There's a lot of bad information out there. But once you understand what value is, then you need to really focus on where the value is in your product, and what your value, what I say hypotheses are. And the best way to do that is to start with your best customers. This is where the voice of the customer research comes into play. Why do you buy from us? Right? Tell us how you use the product, day in the life, who touches it, why is it important to them? And you'll learn so much of it, even if you can go there and watch them use it, especially in manufacturing. I think that's really important. How do I actually use this, right? There's some really interesting stories I've heard from pricing consultants who've done those sort of visits, those plant visits or those ride-alongs. What is a day in the life is? Get that sort of understanding. And then you understand what those value things are. Then you need to be able to quantify that, right? You need to translate that into say, okay, so we're creating, you may be spending $100,000 with us a year, but we're creating $1 million worth of value. Where does that $1 million come from? Is it from these cost reductions, or is it because we help you sell more effectively and increases your revenue? Or is it because, you're using your assets more efficiently so you don't have to buy as much equipment or material or whatever. You have to figure out what that value of that is. So once you have that understood for one customer, then you need to validate it with some other customers. Then you have an understanding of what you really create in terms of value. By the way, you'll also learn where you're not providing value and things that you need to fix in terms of your overall product. And it's not just the product, it's the core product itself, but all the services that wrap around it. The entire customer experience means something. I learned that when I was at Forrester as well. When I would interview customers, I would be saying, well, what do you think about our services? And they'd be talking about other people they dealt with at Forrester that had nothing to do with my product, right?
Yeah.
They were buying other services, or they were dealing with the administration, or they were scheduling things or invoices or whatnot. All of that plays a role in the customer's perception of value. So you need to really, if you're serious about it, you really need to understand the customer journey really well and where you add and subtract value and then start to address those things. So once you do that, then you need to, again, work with the sales team to make sure that you are able to communicate that value effectively, which can take a lot of different forms. But essentially, what are the things you need to communicate with about value? And you take it from there. So those are basically the steps I would recommend.
Yeah. So can you summarize for me then the steps in a one by one approach? So you would say start with.
So first, learn about value.
Yeah.
Second, find the value in your particular product by looking at your best customers.
Yeah.
Then 3, you got to quantify that value. So finding value and quantifying are two different things. Quantifying is more of a specialized thing. And again, if you go to my newsletter or my blog, you'll see how it's done. Then you need to validate that, so you may have to do some quantitative research just to say, okay, this is right. And then you have to make a decision about whether or not you want to change your pricing. Let's assume you don't. Your pricing is fine. It's just a question of communicating. Then you work with your sales, product marketing team to make sure that you have the proof points that you need to validate your claims.
Okay, and so I think very, very clear. And I also heard you saying, understand what value is. There are so many definitions and so many things going around about value that are incorrect and things that are correct. If you have to put this very clear definition of value from your opinion, what would it then be?
Yeah, so I have a definition of value that I use, a practical, workable definition that's evolved over the 15 plus years.
Yeah.
So my value definition is this. It's 3 parts. First of all, value is perception. It's whatever the customer thinks it is. Okay, that's number 1.
Yeah.
And so but no fear, you can change their perception. But first of all, value is perception. So you have to understand what the value is. Second, Second, value is a mix of both left brain and right brain influences. So the logical versus the emotional. All right. And in the B2B context, it's 80% rational, logical, 20% emotional.
Yeah.
B2C products, it's different, much different. So I don't work with B2C products. With B2B, it's rational. Okay. And the third part, that rational piece is proven with a business case. So you have to be able to show the impact on the customer's profitability from using your product in either reducing costs, improving revenue, or more efficiently using assets.
Yeah.
And those are the things that you measure and quantify. So it's a three-part thing. There is a role for emotion in pricing, not in value. Emotion comes into play in the purchasing process. I think this is kind of a technical aspect of it. And I've had debates with other pricing consultants about this, but they try to quantify emotional value. You cannot quantify emotional value. Okay. I can't tell you, how much love is worth, right?
Yeah. Sure.
I know how much fear will make me spend more. That
Yeah.
I know, that I can measure.
Yeah.
But so take emotion out of the value quantification that comes in the price setting and in negotiating. But so focus on that quantified rational piece. So that's what value is.
Yeah, I really like the definition because, as you say, it's really hands-on and clear, and it's something you can actually start working at. Um, if I go one step further, I would say, what would you currently consider with all things happening right now? What are the main challenges in regards to pricing that organizations are struggling with?
Well, if I'm looking just at the software space right now, SaaS is being disrupted by AI. And one of the reasons for that is that the costs of running LLMs is expensive. And whereas before SaaS had a pretty nice cost structure and there were no, marginal costs for adding users and profit margins were high and it was great. So you can use something like per user and still make money. You can't do that anymore, right? Because your profit margins, I think, are being cut in half right now because of AI, because of the costs of running, those agents, etc. So that's a big challenge right now. They have to figure out what they're going to do, and I think most software companies have changed their pricing and have adopted some usage-based pricing components to it. And usage is basically a very old form of pricing. It's cost plus pricing essentially. And so they're dealing with that. Software folks have to figure out how to cover their costs using usage, and they're starting to experiment with outcomes now. But there's a lot of flux going in there. I think in general, there's been a lot of disruption politically, economically, worldwide, with supply chains are being disrupted and tariffs and all of those things. And it's been really a brutal time, I think, for a lot of pricing professionals in the industry. They have to figure out what their costs really are. They don't really have a good sense of predicting what they are because they can change, daily.
Yep.
And how much of that they need to pass on and how they pass that on versus absorbing. And I think companies are kind of figuring that out day by day. So I think those are two big challenges, one for everyone and another for software.
Yeah, no, no, fully agree with that. And because for me, it feels a bit like it becomes even more important to be more agile in your price setting
Yeah.
because the market is shifting more frequently. And if it's either a disruption, as you said already, um, in the supply chain or tariffs or the political environment or so I feel like it's prudent that a lot of organizations are going to get used to being able to have more price changes in a more frequent session. Not saying that B2B manufacturing, etc., has to go to a dynamic situation like B2C. We all understand you have your larger customers and you want to keep them steady and happy and they should be enable you shouldn't able to have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 prices a month or per quarter, right? So but at the same time it's also not as static anymore, I think, as a few years ago, where once a year might cut it. I think it
Yeah,
doesn't anymore.
it is. And now with AI agents actually going out and, shopping and looking at pricing and even negotiating,
Yeah.
um, that's going to change even more and be more dynamic than it is. So yeah, those are big challenges facing the pricing profession right now.
Yeah, and from your perspective, you, as you already said, you have been before, of course, at an AI conference. How do you see AI impacting the role from the pricing specialist?
Well, like any other professional, they have to adopt the tools and get more sophisticated in their analysis and lean on AI tools. I think they also I think the role of pricing is going to change a little bit in that.
Yeah.
So I think AI agents are going to probably be handling a lot of the tasks that pricers do.
Mhm.
One thing that won't change, though, is the strategic aspect of it. As I said, you still need to have a solid product strategy, and you need to, especially if you're going to adopt a value based product positioning. Which, by the way, most companies need to do that, because unless you're the low cost provider and you have economies of scale,
Yeah.
you have to differentiate in some way. Right? So
Yeah.
it's basically being able to understand the value that you create and be able to create that value, communicate that value, and capture that value in your price. So I think those are the things that they I think those skills are going to become even more important now as
Yeah.
the transactional side of procurement um, happens.
I think AI is going to be the best assistant you can have as a pricing specialist because you will be able to do quicker analysis, you will be able to more quickly spot patterns,
Right.
etc. But your strategical choice on your positioning, your strategical choice on the value add and the definition of that,
Hmm.
quantifying might then later be done. I think at least there are very interesting times ahead with regards to the developments on that side. So I would like to thank you very much, Ed, for your time and being here in this podcast. Um, is there anything from your side that you would like to add to the conversation, or you feel like we have missed it?
No, I think we've covered everything. I just would want to say is that, one, really understand your value that you provide to customers, and it comes from using your product as opposed to buying the features. That's the main theme. And also, if people want to learn more about my content, which I provide on the newsletter, the Valorizer, please check that out on Substack. And also contact me if they would like to have a conversation about value coaching. I'd be more than happy to talk with them about it, and I think it could be very useful.
Perfect. We will put your link of the Substack underneath here, so everybody that is interested in subscribing, and I would definitely recommend. I've done it myself as well. There's some great information in there. Subscribe to it so you can see everything that Ed is publishing about value pricing.